I need to say something that's probably going to piss some people off right from the start, which is that being harmless doesn't make you a good person. It just makes you harmless. And honestly, that's a problem. I know. You're sitting there thinking, what exactly are you talking about? But hear me out for a second. Think about that coworker who always says yes to everything. The one who never rocks the boat, never pushes back, never stands up for themselves. You know who I'm talking about. What happens to them? They get the worst projects dumped on their desk. Or think about dating. How many times have you seen someone who's just relentlessly nice get completely walked over? They text back immediately. They're always available. They bend over backwards to accommodate. And what happens? The other person loses interest because there's no challenge there. No mystery. Nothing to chase. I'm not saying you should be harsh or inconsiderate. That's not what this is about. But there's this massive difference between being kind and being weak. And most people confuse the two. The thing that nobody wants to admit is that the world doesn't reward niceness. It rewards strength wrapped in strategy. You can be the most morally upright person on the planet, but if you don't understand how power works, you're going to get eaten alive. I watched this play out with my friend Sarah. She's a brilliant woman, graduated top of her class, and works harder than anyone I know. But she kept getting screwed over at her job because she thought honesty and hard work would be enough. She'd tell her boss exactly what she was working on, share all her ideas in meetings, stay late to help other people with their projects. And you know what happened? Other people took credit for her ideas. Her boss started seeing her as someone who could be exploited, not promoted. Meanwhile, this guy Jake in her office, who did maybe half the work she did, kept getting raises because he knew how to play the game. He knew when to reveal information and when to hold back. He understood that timing was all that matters. Sarah finally figured it out and stopped being so available. She started being more selective about what she shared and when. She also stopped doing other people's work for them. And suddenly, her career took off. Same person, same work ethic, different strategy. That's what we're going to talk about for the next hour. How power actually works, not how we wish it worked. Not some fairy tale version where the good guys always win because they're good. I'm talking about the real mechanics of it. And before you click away thinking this is some sociopath manifesto, stick with me. There's a great deal to learn here, and if you have come this far, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to this channel for more. Now let's begin. Alright, so Machiavelli had this concept he talked about in his book, The Prince. The fox and the lion. The lion is all brute strength. Powerful, intimidating, and everyone knows when the lion is coming. But you know what? Lions get trapped and they are predictable. They rely on one tool, which is force. The fox, though? The fox is cunning. The fox sees the traps before stepping in them. The fox understands that sometimes you need to appear weak to survive. Sometimes you need to play dumb. The fox knows that perception matters more than reality. And the interesting part is that Machiavelli said a smart ruler needs to be both. You need the strength of the lion so people respect you, but you need the cunning of the fox so you don't get destroyed. This is not an ancient philosophy that doesn't apply anymore. This is happening right now every single day all around you. You just don't realize it because we've gotten really good at hiding it. Social media is the perfect example. Everyone's curating their life like it's a museum exhibit. You're not really seeing their reality. You're seeing the mask they are wearing. That influencer posting about their perfect morning routine, they're managing their image. That entrepreneur sharing their journey, that is a strategic vulnerability. They are showing you just enough of the struggle to seem relatable, but not so much that you think they're failing. This is called impression management, and everyone does it whether they admit it or not. You do it when you update your LinkedIn. You do it when you're on a first date. You do it when you're meeting your partner's parents. We all wear masks depending on the context. The question isn't whether you're going to manage impressions. You already are. The question is whether you're doing it consciously and strategically, or whether you're just stumbling through it hoping for the best. Most people stumble because they overshare on social media and then wonder why they don't get hired. Always too honest in job interviews and don't get the offer. They end up showing all their cards in a negotiation and get lowballed. And then there are people who understand this game. They know what to reveal and what to conceal, know how to frame things, and also know that the story you tell about yourself matters just as much as the facts. I had this professor in college who was a master at this. Students and the administration loved him. But if you paid attention, you'd notice he never actually committed to anything controversial. He'd say things that sounded bold, but were actually completely safe. He'd appear to take sides without actually taking sides. He was the fox in action. And you know what? The guy had tenure at 35 and basically ran his department by 40. Does it mean he was being fake? I don't think so. He was being strategic, and he understood that in academia, like in most places, your reputation is everything. And your reputation is built on perception, not necessarily on who you actually are. The uncomfortable truth is that authenticity is overrated. I know that sounds terrible, but hear me out. Everyone's always talking about being authentic and staying true to yourself. But complete, unfiltered authenticity is social suicide in most contexts. The person who says everything they think loses friends. The employee who shares every opinion gets fired. The entrepreneur who's totally transparent about their struggles loses investors. You don't owe everyone your raw, unfiltered self. You are the one to choose what you show, and when you show it, and that's not being fake. That's being smart. Okay, so let's get into some specific principles here. I'm calling these laws, but really they are just patterns that play out over and over again in our daily human interaction. This one trips people up because we're taught that honesty is always good. And on some level, sure, honesty is important in close relationships. But broadcasting every single thing you're planning, that's how you lose. Think about it. If you tell everyone at work you're applying for jobs elsewhere, what happens? They stop giving you important projects. They start pushing you out before you're ready to leave. You lose your negotiating power. If you're negotiating for a car and you just walk in saying, I need to buy a car today because mine died and I have to drive to work tomorrow, you just gave away all your leverage. The salesperson knows you're desperate, so you're definitely paying a sticker price. I watched my friend Mike make this mistake with a startup he was building. He was so excited about his idea that he told everyone about it. He explained the whole business model, the target market, everything, and you know what happened? Someone else in his industry, someone with more resources, launched a nearly identical product 6 months before Mike could get his off the ground. Mike is still working his day job till now. The instinct to share is strong, especially when you're excited about something, but truly that excitement makes you vulnerable. Every time you reveal a plan, you give other people the opportunity to block it, copy it, or undermine it. Now, does this mean you should be secretive about everything? No. You need some people you trust. You need advisors, mentors, friends who can give you feedback. But you need to be selective. And you need to understand that even with people you trust, there's information you keep to yourself until the timing is right. Timing is everything with this. You reveal things when it benefits you, not when you feel like it. You announce the new job after you sign the offer, not when you start interviewing. You share the business idea after you've built some protection around it, not when it's just a concept. This feels manipulative to a lot of people. But ask yourself this question. Is it manipulative to protect yourself, and is it also manipulative to not hand your competition a roadmap to beat you? I don't think so. This is common sense. Here's one thing that took me way too long to figure out. People don't care about your problems. They only care about their problems, and if you want them to help you, you need to frame things in terms of what they get out of it. This is where people mess this up sometimes. They go into a salary negotiation and start talking about how they need more money for rent, for student loans, whatever. And the boss is sitting there thinking, okay, but why should I care? That's harsh, but it's true. Your boss isn't your parent. Your financial problems are not their motivation to pay you more. But if you go in saying, I've brought in 3 major clients this year, trained 2 new team members, and I've streamlined our process to save us 10 hours a week, now you're speaking their language. You're showing value and giving them a reason that benefits them. This applies everywhere. Want your partner to be more affectionate? Telling them, I feel neglected, might get you some short-term sympathy. But explaining how physical affection makes you more energized and happy, which makes you a better partner, gives them a reason beyond just meeting your needs. Want your friend to help you move? Saying, I really need your help this week. I'll buy pizza and beer, and I promise I'll help you with that website project you mentioned, is better. You're making it worth their time. People also mess this up constantly with networking too. They reach out to someone asking for a job, an introduction, advice, whatever. And they frame it entirely around what they need. I'm looking for opportunities. I'd love to pick your brain. Can you introduce me to so-and-so? Okay, but what's in it for the other person, and why should they spend their social capital on you? People respond when you make it easy and beneficial for them. I saw your post about X, and I actually have some experience with why that might be useful to you. Happy to share what I learned if you're interested. Also, I'd love to hear about your work if you ever have time. See the difference? You led with value. You made it about them first. Now they're actually interested in talking to you. This isn't being fake. This is understanding that people are busy. They have their own goals, and they respond to things that align with those goals. If you want something from someone, you need to frame it in a way that makes sense for them, not just for you. This one is counterintuitive, right? We think being available, being present, being reliable makes people value us. And to some extent, that's true. But there's a tipping point. When you're too available, you become background noise. Scarcity creates value. This is basic economics, but it applies to people too. When you're always there, always responding immediately, always free to hang out, people start taking you for granted. They assume you'll always be there, so they stop appreciating it. I learned this the hard way in my 20s. I had this group of friends, and I was always the one organizing things, reaching out, making plans. And slowly, I realized they only called me when they needed something, when they were bored, when everyone else was busy. I was the backup option. So I pulled back, stopped initiating, and started saying no sometimes. I got busy with my own projects, and you know what happened? Suddenly, they were checking in more, asking when I was free, actually making an effort. Same thing happens in dating. The person who's too eager, too available, and too quick to drop everything will always lose attraction value. It's not that people are evil or shallow. It's because humans are wired to value things that seem scarce. Now, this doesn't mean you should play games or be flaky. That backfires. It means you should have your own life. Have your own goals and don't drop everything every time someone reaches out. Respect your own time and other people will too. There's this balance though. You can't be absent all the time or people will just forget about you. But periodic absence and strategic unavailability keeps people interested. It keeps them wondering what you're up to. Think about the most interesting people you know. They're busy and have various things going on for them. When you get their time, it feels special because you know they had other options. That's the power of absence. Okay, this one is going to make some people uncomfortable, but sometimes being bad is the right move. And by bad, I don't mean immoral. I mean willing to make the hard choice that others won't. Most people avoid conflict at all costs. They want everyone to like them. They want to be seen as nice, and sometimes that's fine. But other times that just means you get walked all over. There are moments where you need to be willing to be the bad guy and fire someone who's not performing. To end a friendship that's toxic. To walk away from a deal that's not fair and to say no when everyone's pressuring you to say yes. The people who rise to power and build successful businesses, those people command respect and they're willing to make those calls. They don't let the fear of being disliked stop them from doing what needs to be done. I had a client once who was running a small company. Great guy, really cared about his team. But he had one employee who was terrible. Showed up late, did sloppy work, brought down morale. Everyone knew it. But this guy couldn't bring himself to fire her because he felt bad. So the problem festered. Good employees started leaving because they were tired of picking up her slack. Finally, I told him, "You're being selfish by being nice. You're protecting your need to be liked at the expense of your whole team." That hit him hard. But it was true. Sometimes the kind thing is to be firm, and being too nice is actually cruel because it lets problems spread. You don't have to be mean, but you have to be willing to disappoint people sometimes. You have to be okay with not being everyone's favorite, because trying to please everyone means you stand for nothing. Information is the ultimate weapon in any interaction. Whoever has more information has more power. Simple as that. Think about a poker game. The player who can read everyone else's tells while hiding their own has a massive advantage. Same thing in business, relationships, and every other thing. When you're in a negotiation, the person who knows more about the other side's situation wins. If you're buying a house and you know the seller is desperate to close quickly, you have leverage. If they don't know that you have other options, you have more leverage. This is why lawyers tell you to shut up when you're being questioned. More information from you gives them more ammunition. Every detail you volunteer is a potential weakness. I see people give away information constantly without even realizing it. They overshare in interviews and reveal they're desperate for the job. They tell friends private information that gets gossiped about. They post their whole lives on social media where anyone can study them. Meanwhile, the people who succeed keep things close to the vest. They ask more questions than they answer. They listen more than they talk. They gather information while giving away as little as possible. This doesn't mean be secretive about everything, but it means be intentional. Before you share something, ask yourself, does this person need to know this? How could this information be used against me? And what do I gain by revealing this? In conversations, especially important ones, try to be the listener. People love talking about themselves. Allow them to talk. You learn what they want, their fears, and what motivates them. Meanwhile, they know less about you. That asymmetry is power. This one sounds darker than it is, so just stay with me. The people who have the most security in their relationships, jobs, and their lives have made themselves difficult to replace. Not impossible, just difficult enough that people think twice. At work, this might mean being the only person who knows how a critical system works. In relationships, it might mean being the person who remembers everyone's birthdays, who organizes the friend group, who keeps things running. In business, it means creating something where people need you specifically, not just anyone who can do what you do. My buddy Tom figured this out at his company. He was a good developer, but so were 20 other people there. He could have been replaced at any given time. So he started documenting everything, training people, making himself more valuable by making the company run better. Sounds backwards, right? But here's the twist. He made himself the person who understood the whole system, not just his part. The whole thing. He became the translator between departments, the guy who could explain technical stuff to non-technical people, the person everyone came to when something broke. 6 months later, they couldn't afford to lose him. Not that he was hoarding information, but because he'd made himself central to how things operated. When layoffs came, he was safe. When raises came, he got one without asking. The key is doing this without being obvious about it. If people feel like you're holding them hostage, it backfires. But if you're genuinely valuable, if losing you would create real problems, then that's security. Same thing in personal relationships, but you have to be careful here. Creating dependency in romantic relationships can turn toxic fast. But being the person who adds genuine value to people's lives, you make things better, fun, organized, and more meaningful than that's healthy dependency. People want you around because life is better with you in it, not because they're afraid of what happens without you. The difference is your intention. Are you creating dependency to trap people or to genuinely add value to their lives? One is manipulation. The other is just being good at what you do. Here's something that messes people up sometimes. They think honesty is binary. It's either you're completely honest about everything or you're a liar. But that's not how it works in the real world. Strategic honesty is more powerful than either complete transparency or complete deception. You tell the truth, but you're selective about which truths you tell and when. I learned this from watching my dad negotiate. He was in sales for 30 years, and he was really good at it. He never lied to clients. Never. But he didn't tell them everything either. He'd be completely honest about the product specs, about delivery times, about pricing. That built trust. But he wouldn't volunteer information that would kill the deal. Like, oh, by the way, this exact same thing goes on sale next month. That's not lying. The client could ask. They could also do research. But he wasn't going to shoot himself in the foot by volunteering information that worked against him. This works in other contexts too. In an argument with your partner, you can be honest about your feelings without dumping every negative thought you've ever had about them. You can be truthful about the current issue without bringing up every past grievance. That's not being fake. That's being strategic about what serves the conversation and what just creates damage. At work, you can be honest about project challenges without making everything sound like a disaster. You can share concerns without undermining confidence. You can tell the truth in a way that's helpful, not just the raw truth. The people who master this come across as trustworthy because they are honest when it counts. But they also don't say everything they're thinking. They filter and choose what serves the situation. There's this woman I know, Kelly, who runs a nonprofit. She's incredibly honest about their mission, their impact, their challenges. Donors trust her completely. But she doesn't tell potential donors about internal staff drama, budget anxiety, or the fact that she's interviewing for other jobs. Those truths would undermine trust without adding value. They're not relevant to the donor relationship. When she does need to share difficult information, people believe her because she's built credibility. That's the power of selective honesty. You spend your truth wisely, so when you really need people to trust you, they do. Every interaction happens inside a frame that is a set of assumptions about what's happening and what the rules are. Most people accept whatever frame they're given. Smart people set the frame themselves. Let me give you an example. You're in a salary negotiation. If your boss frames it as, "We're trying to figure out what we can afford to pay you," you're already losing. You're accepting a frame where the company's budget is the limiting factor and you're asking for them to stretch it. But what if you reframe it? "I'm trying to figure out if this role aligns with my market value and career trajectory." Now it's about whether the job is good enough for you, not whether you're good enough for the raise. Completely different dynamic. Dating is full of this. Someone might frame the relationship as, "We're casually seeing each other," which gives them permission to not commit. If you accept that frame, you're stuck in it. But you can reframe, "I'm looking for something serious, so if that's not where this is going, I need to know now." You just changed the whole dynamic. My sister dealt with this at her kids' school. The teacher kept framing parent-teacher conferences as, "Here are the problems with your child." Very defensive and accusatory. So my sister started reframing, "Let's collaborate on helping my son succeed." What can we do together? Same situation, totally different energy. The teacher went from adversarial to collaborative because the frame shifted. Frames are everywhere. Meetings at work, arguments with friends, and political debates. Whoever controls the frame controls the conversation. Most people don't even realize they're operating inside someone else's frame until it's too late. Start noticing when someone's trying to frame an interaction in a way that benefits them. Then decide, do you accept that frame, or do you challenge it and propose a different one? Sometimes accepting the frame is fine, but sometimes you need to say, hold on, that's not actually the right way to look at this. The power move is being aware of frames and making conscious choices about them instead of just going along with whatever frame you're handed. This seems counterintuitive given everything else we've talked about, but knowing when to lose strategically is just as important as knowing how to win. Sometimes losing a battle wins you the war. Sometimes giving someone a win makes them overconfident. Sometimes taking the loss now sets you up better for later. I watched this play out with a couple I know. They were arguing about where to go on vacation. He wanted the mountains, she wanted the beach. He could have pushed harder, made his case, and would have probably won the argument. But he let it go, took the loss, and they went to the beach. But now she owes him one. And the next time they have a disagreement about something he actually cares about, he's got leverage. Plus, he didn't create resentment by fighting over something that wasn't that important to him. Strategic loss is equal to a long-term win. In business, this might mean conceding a point in a negotiation that doesn't matter to you but matters to them. They feel like they won something. They're more agreeable on the things you actually care about. You lose the battle, win the war. Or it might mean letting someone take credit for something. Sounds terrible, right? But if that person is your boss and taking credit makes them look good, that can benefit you long term. If they succeed, you succeed. And meanwhile, the people who matter know the real story. There's a guy I know who works in corporate strategy. He's brilliant, but he's not aggressive about credit. Other people pitch his ideas all the time. And you'd think that would hurt him, but it doesn't. Because the executives know where the ideas are actually coming from. And those executives trust him because he's not playing the credit-grabbing game. He's willing to lose that battle because he's winning the war of being seen as a team player and strategic thinker. The key is being intentional about it. You're not losing because you're weak or because you got outplayed. You're choosing to lose because you've calculated that the loss serves you better than the win would. This takes real confidence, though. Most people can't do it because their ego won't let them. They need every win, every bit of credit, every argument won. And that rigidity makes them predictable and easy to manipulate. When you're secure enough to lose strategically, you become much more dangerous because people can't predict you. Sometimes you need to fight hard. Sometimes you also can fold immediately. They can't figure out your pattern because you're operating on a level they don't understand. All right, last one. And this is important. When you're doing anything strategic, anything that could be interpreted as manipulative, you need plausible deniability. You need to be able to claim innocent intentions if questioned. This doesn't mean being dishonest. It means structuring your actions so they can be interpreted multiple ways. The strategic interpretation serves you, but the innocent interpretation protects you. Simple example is when you want to network with someone important, but you don't want to seem like you're kissing up to them. So you don't send them a message saying, "I'd love to connect because I think you could help my career." Instead, you share an article they might find interesting with a note like, "Thought about you when I saw this." If they respond positively, you can build from there. If they don't, you haven't revealed that you wanted something. Plausible deniability. You were just being nice and sharing something relevant. The reason this matters is simple. People resent being manipulated, even when the manipulation might be justified. If they can point to what you did and say, "That was calculated, that was strategic, or you were playing me," you lose trust permanently. But if your actions can be explained innocently, even if there was strategy behind them, people are more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe we're being strategic. Maybe we're just being normal. They can't prove it either way. This is how you protect yourself while still operating effectively. You do what you need to do, but you structure it in ways that don't look overtly manipulative. You maintain the option of innocent interpretation. And look, I know this all sounds very calculated. It is. But the alternative is either being completely naive and getting crushed, or being obviously manipulative and getting caught. This is the middle path. Strategic but defensible. Effective but not overtly so. The best players are the ones you never realize are playing. Their moves look natural. Their strategy looks like personality. T. Air calculation looks like instinct. That's what plausible deniability gives you. The ability to operate strategically while maintaining the appearance of just being yourself. Alright, so we've talked about individual tactics, that is, how to protect yourself, how to be strategic in one-on-one interactions. But there's this whole other level that most people never even think about. It's not about manipulating a person. It's about manipulating the environment that person exists in. Think about it like this. You can try to convince someone to do something through argument, persuasion, and incentives. Or you can just change their environment so that the thing you want becomes the obvious choice. Here, you're not pushing or forcing them, you're just arranging the pieces so they naturally move in the direction you want. This is what really sophisticated operators do. They don't fight battles directly. They shape the battlefield so the battle goes their way before it even starts. Let me give you a concrete example. There was this guy at my old company, Marcus. He wanted to get promoted to run a new division they were creating. But there were 3 other candidates, all equally qualified. He could have campaigned for himself, talked himself up, whatever. But that's risky and makes you look desperate and, in a way, creates enemies. Instead, Marcus did something smarter. He started having casual conversations with different people in leadership. Not about the promotion, just general stuff. But in those conversations, he'd drop little seeds. You know, I was thinking about this new division. The biggest challenge is going to be the integration with the European team, and whoever runs it needs relationships there. Marcus had those relationships. He was already planting that association. To someone else, the regulatory stuff is going to be complicated. You'd really need someone who understands the compliance landscape. Marcus had compliance experience. To another person, it's going to require someone who can build a team from scratch. That's a specific skill set. Marcus had done that before. He never said, I should get this job. He just shaped how people thought about the job. By the time the decision came around, the leadership team had all these associations in their heads. When they thought about the challenges of the role, they thought about Marcus's strengths. He engineered the environment so the decision felt obvious. That's next level. He didn't compete directly. He changed the criteria people were using to evaluate candidates. Here's another angle on this. Sometimes you want someone to do something, but asking them directly won't work. They'll say no, or do it reluctantly, or it'll create tension. So instead of asking them, you create a social environment where doing the thing is the path of least resistance. Parents do this instinctively, though they might not realize it. You want your kid to eat vegetables. You could force them, create a fight, or you could just make vegetables the default option. Put them on every plate. Have them at every meal. Make it normal. Social environment is shaped, but behavior changed. This works on adults too. I saw this happen with a startup I consulted for. The CEO wanted the team to work longer hours, but she couldn't just demand that. People would have quit or resented it. So she started staying late herself, made it visible, and started scheduling late afternoon meetings. Ordered dinner for people who were there past 6 and created a culture where staying late was normal, even appreciated. She didn't mandate anything. She engineered the social environment. And within a few months, working late had gone from unusual to standard. People who left at 5 felt like they were leaving early, even though that was normal business hours. The environment shifted, behavior followed. Now, before you start thinking this is evil, consider that environments shape behavior constantly, whether anyone's doing it intentionally or not. Your friend group has norms that affect how you act. Your workplace has a culture that shapes what feels acceptable. Your family has unspoken rules that everyone follows. The question isn't whether environments shape behavior. They actually do. The question is whether you're going to be intentional about it or just let it happen randomly. This is more subtle, but incredibly powerful. If you control what information people have access to, and when they get it, you can shape decisions without ever appearing to push in any direction. I learned this from a lawyer I know. She does mediation for divorces. And she told me something fascinating. The order in which information gets presented completely changes how people react to it. If you lead with the most contentious issue, people get defensive and the whole negotiation falls apart. But if you start with something easy, build agreement, create momentum, and then introduce the difficult stuff, people are more willing to compromise. She's not changing the information. She's just controlling the sequence. And that sequence changes everything. This happens in business all the time. Ever been in a meeting where someone presents 3 options, but the way they present them makes one seem obviously better? Option A has all these risks highlighted. Option B is presented as theoretically interesting but impractical. Option C is framed as the balanced, sensible choice. They didn't lie about any of the options. They just controlled how the information was structured and sequenced. My friend who works in product management does this. When she wants approval for a feature, she doesn't just present it cold. She spends weeks before the official pitch having casual conversations, sharing user feedback, pointing out competitor features. By the time the actual decision meeting happens, everyone's already primed. They've been thinking about the problem. The feature she's proposing feels like the natural solution. She architected the information flow so the decision felt inevitable. Sometimes you want to influence someone, but you know they'll resist if it comes directly from you. Maybe there's baggage in the relationship, they don't trust your motives, or they just don't like being told what to do. So you don't tell them, but you get someone else to tell them. Someone they trust and respect, or someone neutral. This is how smart people handle office politics. You don't badmouth your rival directly, it makes you look petty. Instead, you have conversations with other people where you raise concerns. Thoughtful concerns and reasonable questions. And those people start having their own conversations. Pretty soon, multiple people are questioning your rival's approach, and nobody can trace it back to you. I'm not saying this is good. I'm just saying this is what happens. And if you don't understand it, you're vulnerable to it. I watched this play out with a couple I'm friends with. The wife wanted them to move to a different city, but the husband was resistant. She could have kept pushing directly, but that was creating fights. So she stopped. Instead, she started having her husband's close friends over more often. Friends who'd already made similar moves. And those friends would naturally talk about how great their new cities were. The career opportunities, the lifestyle improvements. She never brought it up. But suddenly her husband was hearing the same messages from people he trusted. 6 months later, he suggested they consider relocating and thought it was his idea. That's environmental manipulation. She didn't change his mind through argument. She changed the social environment until his mind changed naturally. This one is dark, but you see it everywhere once you know how to look for it. You want someone to choose option B. But if you just offer them option B, they might say no. So instead, you offer them option A, which is terrible, option B, which is what you actually want, and option C, which is also terrible. Suddenly option B looks great by comparison. Restaurants do this with wine lists. The second cheapest wine is usually overpriced, but people buy it because they don't want to look cheap by buying the cheapest, and they don't want to spend a lot. The restaurant engineered the choice architecture. Salespeople do this constantly. They'll show you the expensive model first, which you reject. Then the mid-tier model, which suddenly seems reasonable. They didn't want to sell you the expensive one. That was just there to make the mid-tier look good. The expensive option was a decoy. This also happens in personal relationships too. Someone wants you to agree to something moderately unreasonable. So they start by asking for something extremely unreasonable. You say no. They compromise down to the thing they actually wanted. You feel like you won the negotiation, but you just got played. The extreme ask was never real. I had a roommate who did this. He wanted to throw a party on Saturday, but he knew I didn't like parties. So he asked if he could throw a party on Friday. I said absolutely not. Friday's a work night. He acted disappointed. And later he asked about Saturday, like it was a compromise. I said yes because I felt like I'd already said no once. This actually took me months to realize he never wanted Friday in the first place. That's choice architecture. The environment of options shapes which option gets picked. If you control the options, you control the outcome without ever forcing anything. Here's one more aspect of this. Sometimes you're in an environment with tension, conflict, building frustration. As a leader, a boss, or as whoever's in charge, you need that tension to dissipate before it explodes. But you can't just tell people to calm down. That doesn't work. So you create a pressure release valve, a controlled way for people to vent that doesn't threaten your position or the overall system. Companies do this with anonymous feedback surveys. Makes employees feel heard. They can complain safely. Management can ignore most of it, but address a few small things to seem responsive. The pressure has been released and the system is maintained. Parents do this by letting kids win small battles. You let them choose their clothes, even if the outfit is ridiculous. The kids feel autonomous, and you maintain control over the things that actually matter. I saw a manager do this brilliantly at a company going through layoffs. People were terrified and their morale was tanking. He couldn't stop the layoffs, but he created these weekly all-hands meetings where people could ask anonymous questions. He answered them honestly, even when the answers weren't great. Just giving people a space to express fear and frustration helped. The situation didn't change, but the environment became more manageable because there was a release valve. This is environmental engineering at a psychological level. You're not solving the underlying problem. You're managing how people experience it so they don't revolt or shut down completely. All right, so we've talked about how these patterns work. Now let's talk about how to protect yourself when someone's using them against you. First off, you need to recognize the patterns. Manipulative people have tells, just like anyone else. The trick is knowing what to look for. Always watch for inconsistency. People who are playing games often say one thing to one person and something else to another. They shift their story depending on who they're talking to. If you compare notes with others and find discrepancies, that's a red flag. Pay attention to flattery. Everyone likes compliments, but excessive flattery is a manipulation tactic. If someone's laying it on thick, especially early in a relationship, be suspicious because they're trying to lower your guard. Look at their relationships. Do they have any long-term friendships? Do people seem to cycle in and out of their life? Manipulative people often burn bridges because eventually people figure them out. If someone's always having drama with former friends, former colleagues, former partners, there's probably a pattern. Notice how they handle disagreement. Healthy people can disagree without it becoming World War III. Manipulative people often react to disagreement with guilt-tripping, gaslighting, or playing the victim. They always make you feel like you're the problem for having boundaries. It's always good to trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. We're wired to pick up on social cues, even subconsciously. If you feel uneasy around someone but can't quite put your finger on why, don't just ignore that. Your intuition is processing information your conscious mind hasn't caught on yet. So, what do you do when you identify someone who's trying to manipulate you? Sometimes you can just cut them out. But sometimes you can't just do that. Maybe it's a coworker, a family member, an ex you share custody with. That's where the gray rock method comes in. The idea is to become as boring and unresponsive as a gray rock. Give them nothing to work with. Manipulative people feed on emotional reactions. They just want to get a rise out of you. They want information and engagement. So you give them none of that. You give short answers with no emotion and details. Just bland, factual responses. For example, how was your weekend? Fine. What did you do? Not much. They'll probably try harder at first. They'll poke and prod, trying to at least get a reaction. Don't give it to them. Stay as neutral and boring as possible. This works because manipulative people eventually lose interest. If they can't get any supply from you, they'll move on right to someone else. It's not fun or satisfying, but it works. I had to do this with a former colleague who was a gossip and a manipulator. Every conversation was just a fishing expedition for information she could use or spread around. So I stopped giving her anything. I gave her neutral, boring, and short responses all the time, so eventually she stopped trying and found other targets. There's something most people don't think about, and it's that the reason manipulation works so well on some people is because it hits old wounds. If you grew up being told you weren't good enough, you're vulnerable to people who use conditional approval to control you. If you grew up in chaos, you might be drawn to people who create drama, and that's because it feels familiar. If you were neglected as a child, you might accept breadcrumbs of attention from people who should be giving you genuine care. Manipulative people are really good at finding these wounds and pressing on them. They can sense insecurity and also spot the people pleasers. They know who's desperate for approval. The defense isn't just about spotting their tactics. It's about healing those wounds so the tactics don't work on you anymore. This means therapy for a lot of people. It means understanding where your triggers come from. It means building self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation. It means learning to sit with discomfort instead of doing anything to make it stop. Because the thing is that confident people with healthy boundaries are really hard to manipulate. They don't need your approval badly enough to compromise themselves. And don't fear being alone enough to stay in toxic situations. They trust their judgment enough to walk away when something feels wrong. So if you keep finding yourself in situations with manipulative people, the question isn't just, how do I spot them? It's also, why am I attracting this? What wound am I carrying that makes me vulnerable? That's deeper work, but it's the real answer. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to pull this all together and talk about what this really means. And to do that, we need to go somewhere you might not expect, into psychology, philosophy, and into the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Carl Jung had this concept called the shadow. The shadow is all the parts of yourself you deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. The anger you pretend you don't have. The selfishness you think you're above. The capacity for cruelty that you insist you lack. Everyone has a shadow. And the shadow doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It just operates unconsciously, leaking out in ways you don't recognize or control. Jung said the goal isn't to eliminate the shadow. It's to integrate and acknowledge it, to accept that you have these capacities within you, and to bring them into conscious awareness so you can choose when and how to use them. That's what this whole conversation has been about. Understanding these Machiavellian tactics isn't about becoming a manipulative person. It's about integrating your shadow. Acknowledging that you have the capacity for strategic thinking, self-protection, and ruthlessness when necessary. Here's where Jung and Machiavelli actually intersect in a way that most people miss. They were both dealing with the same fundamental human problem from different angles. Jung approached it psychologically. Machiavelli approached it politically. But they arrived at eerily similar conclusions. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince about how a ruler must learn how not to be good. Not that they should be evil, but that they need to understand that rigid adherence to conventional morality will destroy them. A prince who never lies will be surrounded by liars. A prince who never uses force will be overthrown by someone who does. The capacity for badness is necessary for survival. Jung said almost the exact same thing about individual psychology. He wrote that people who identify completely with their persona, which is their public face and their good self, become brittle and unconscious. They deny their shadow, which means their shadow controls them from beneath awareness. They think they're purely good, which makes them naive, easy to manipulate, and prone to sudden explosions when the repressed shadow finally breaks through. Both of them understood that wholeness requires embracing contradiction. You can't be fully human by only accepting the light parts of yourself. You can't navigate reality by only using good strategies. The difference is this. Machiavelli was writing for princes, for people who already had power and needed to keep it. Jung was writing for individuals trying to become whole, but the mechanism they're describing is identical. Integration of the denied self. Here's the thing that blows my mind about this connection. Both Jung and Machiavelli recognized that people fall into two categories. Not good and evil, but that's too simple. The real categories are conscious and unconscious. Machiavelli describes princes who fail because they don't understand power. They think being loved is enough. They think being moral according to Christian ethics will protect them. They're unconscious of how power actually works. So they get destroyed by people who are conscious of it. The tragedy isn't that they're good people. It's that they're naive people who think goodness is sufficient armor. Jung describes the exact same pattern psychologically. People who repress their shadow and insist they don't have aggressive or selfish impulses, who identify completely with being nice, actually become victims. Not that they're good, but because they're unconscious. They can't see manipulation coming because they can't imagine that people operate that way. They can't defend themselves because defense requires accessing parts of themselves they've disowned. The answer for both isn't to become evil. It's to become conscious and acknowledge the full range of human capacity within yourself. To integrate your shadow. When you do that, something interesting happens. You become what Jung called the conscious monster. Not an actual monster, but someone who knows they have monstrous capacities and chooses not to use them. That choice is meaningful because it's a real choice. You have the option and the capability. You choose restraint from a position of strength, not weakness. Machiavelli would call this the prince who knows how to use force, but chooses diplomacy. Not because they can't fight, but they've calculated that diplomacy serves them better in this instance. The capacity for violence makes the choice for peace meaningful. The interesting thing is that both Jung and Machiavelli understood that there's a difference between being virtuous and appearing virtuous. And both of them said the appearance matters more than the reality in most contexts. Machiavelli was explicit about this. He wrote that a prince should appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright, but be ready to act contrary to these qualities when necessary. The appearance of virtue is politically necessary. The rigid practice of virtue is politically fatal. This sounds cynical until you realize Jung said basically the same thing about the persona. The persona is the mask you wear in social contexts. It's not fake exactly. It's the version of yourself that's appropriate for public consumption. Jung said everyone needs a functional persona. You can't just run around being your raw, unfiltered self in every context. That's not authenticity. That's just being socially incompetent. But here's where they both add the crucial nuance. The persona becomes pathological when you believe it's your whole self. when you think the mask is your face, when you perform virtue so convincingly that you forget it's a performance. Machiavelli warns princes against this. If you believe your own propaganda, if you think you really are as virtuous as you appear, you'll make fatal mistakes. You'll trust when you should be cautious. You'll be merciful when you should be ruthless. You'll confuse the performance with reality. Jung warns individuals against the same thing. If you completely identify with your persona, with your nice self, you lose access to your authentic power. You become shallow. You develop neuroses. The disowned shadow starts acting out in your life in ways you don't control. Both of them are saying, perform virtue publicly, but know yourself privately. Understand that the performance is strategic, not the totality of who you are. So here's the thing that both of them point to, and this is what most people miss. The more fully you integrate your shadow, the more capable you become of acting virtuously. This seems backwards. Shouldn't acknowledging your capacity for manipulation make you more manipulative? Or shouldn't accepting your aggressive impulses make you more violent? And shouldn't integrating your selfishness make you more self-centered? No. And both Jung and Machiavelli understood why. When you repress parts of yourself, they control you unconsciously. You have passive-aggressive tendencies you don't recognize. You manipulate people while thinking you're being helpful. You're selfish in ways you can't see, and your shadow operates, but you're not directing it. It's acting through you. But when you integrate the shadow, when you consciously acknowledge these capacities, you gain control over them. You can choose. You see the manipulative move you could make and decide not to. You feel the aggressive impulse and choose a different response. You recognize the selfish option and deliberately pick the generous one. Machiavelli describes princes who are most stable and successful as those who understand power but don't abuse it. They know when they could use force and choose not to because they've calculated a better path. They're not restrained by ignorance of their options. They're restrained by strategy and wisdom. That's real virtue, a choice from a position of capability, not constraint from a position of weakness. Jung describes integrated individuals the same way. Once you've faced your shadow, once you've acknowledged the aggressive, sexual, selfish, and cruel impulses within you, you're no longer possessed by them. You can work with them and channel them. Choose when to express them and when to restrain them. You become whole, which makes you more capable of genuine goodness, because your goodness is conscious and chosen, not unconscious and compulsive. Once you know what you're capable of, once you see how power works, once you understand manipulation and strategy and all the dark mechanics of human interaction, you carry that weight. Machiavelli wrote about the loneliness of leadership. The prince who understands these realities can't be naive anymore, can't trust easily, and has to constantly calculate, has to live with the knowledge that they could be betrayed at any moment, that loyalty is conditional, and that their power is always precarious. There's a melancholy in the prince that people miss because they're focused on the controversial advice. Jung wrote about the burden of consciousness. Once you integrate the shadow, you can't unsee it. You see it operating in other people. You see your own dark impulses clearly. You carry the knowledge that you're capable of harm. That weight doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it consciously instead of being crushed by it unconsciously. This is why both of them emphasized that this path isn't for everyone. Some people are happier staying unconscious, happier with their illusions, happier not knowing how things really work. And honestly, that's fine. Not everyone needs to go down this road. If you've made it this far into this video, you're probably not that person. You're someone who'd rather know, even if knowing is uncomfortable. You'd rather be conscious, even if consciousness is heavy, and you'd rather integrate your shadow, even if it means carrying the weight of understanding what you're capable of. So the final question becomes, once you've integrated the shadow, once you understand these Machiavellian patterns, once you're conscious of the full range of human behavior, including your own capacity for it, What do you do with that? Both Jung and Machiavelli actually converge on an answer, though they phrase it differently. Machiavelli says the goal is stability, security, and good governance. The prince who understands power uses it to create order, not chaos. The tactics are tools for building something, not just weapons for destruction. Jung says the goal is individuation, which is becoming your fullest, most authentic self. The integrated person uses their wholeness to create meaning, to build relationships, to contribute something to the world. The shadow isn't integrated, so you can go around manipulating people. It's integrated so you can be fully alive and fully conscious. So the synthesis is this. You learn these patterns. You understand how power works. You acknowledge your capacity for manipulation, aggression, selfishness, strategy. You bring all of that into conscious awareness. You integrate the shadow, and then you make a choice. A conscious, intentional choice about how to use that understanding. You can use it to protect yourself and the people you care about. You can use it to build things that matter. You can use it to navigate a complex world without being naive or getting crushed. There's a quote I love, "A harmless man is not a good man." A good man is a very, very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. That's the integration. That's Jung and Machiavelli meeting in the same place. Understanding that goodness without capability is just weakness. That virtue without power is just naivety. That being nice without being strong is just being harmless. So here's where we are. You've just spent the last hour learning about power, manipulation, strategy, and self-protection. And hopefully, you're walking away with a more realistic understanding of how human dynamics actually work. But knowledge by itself isn't enough. Understanding these patterns is step 1. Step 2 is figuring out why you needed this information in the first place. For most people watching this, there's a wound underneath. Maybe you've been manipulated before and you're trying to make sure it never happens again. Maybe you're finally realizing that the world doesn't work the way you thought it did and you're trying to adapt. All of that makes sense. But here's what I want you to understand. Building armor is important, but it's not the whole solution. You also need to heal the wound that made you vulnerable in the first place. Learning Machiavellian tactics helps you protect yourself, but healing the underlying wound helps you stop needing quite so much protection. It helps you choose better people to begin with. It helps you trust your judgment and helps you build relationships that aren't based on manipulation and strategy, but on genuine connection. Understanding power dynamics is useful, but understanding yourself is transformative. You deserve relationships where you don't have to constantly strategize, where you can trust people, where you can be yourself without fear. But to get there, you need to do more than just build walls. You need to heal what's inside them. So take what you learned today, use it, protect yourself, but also go deeper. Figure out why you needed it. Work on those wounds. Build a life where you're strong not just because you understand the game, but because you've healed enough that the game matters less. Thanks for sticking with me for the last hour. Now go do the work.